December 2016 was the final of the original run of novel adaptations by Big Finish, and unfortunately ended due to sales numbers. To fans of the Wilderness Years and the Doctor Who books from the 90s, with the Virgin New Adventures, Missing Adventures, BBC PDA and EDA books, it was looking rather bleak for the range, and the novel adaptations were discontinued. Fast forward to July 2024 and we have the return of the range with the first published book from the Virgin Missing Adventures that began in 1994, the 30th anniversary of the Virgin Missing Adventures and Paul Cornell's highly acclaimed 5th Doctor, Tegan and Nyssa story titled Goth Opera, considered a pastiche by Cornell himself of Terrance Dicks's work such as State of Decay in the E-Space trilogy Blood Harvest from the Virgin New Adventures. The range's success now rests on Goth Opera. For me, my most anticipated release from Big Finish. But did it deliver? I will be drawing comparisons to the original book to cover any differences and give my review on the novel adaptation. If you're interested in a more in-depth analysis on the story with Goth Opera, I recommend watching the review on the book. This video acts as my opinion on the adaptation and go over some key differences compared to the book, along with what I liked and disliked about the adaptation, despite me not really disliking it. Let's review, finally, the novel adaptation of Goth Opera. The audio begins with Nicholas Briggs making a disclaimer of content not suitable for young listeners. When I heard that, I went, oh boy, they are going to be faithful to the dark depictions of the book. That's what I was believing, because I had issues with the previous audios that were toned down so much it felt too far away from the original material. Some things I do get, because when it comes to the books in the 90s, some had zero filter. I'm looking at you, damaged goods. No filter whatsoever. But Goth Opera, the dark depictions, oh was it perfect, and eliminating that writing from Goth Opera from the book wouldn't make it Goth Opera anymore. The horror of the situation is what made the book so scary and terrifying. The haunting and eerie prologue scene displays a perfect representation of what the novel explores and its ideas relating to the Time Lords and the Great Vampires. A history that is dark and twisted. Rassilon, along with the Other and Omega, thwarted to destroy what they refer to as a parasite and wipe it off the face of the universe. While other Time Lords think differently, Time Lord cults and deserters from the Time Lord High Council went their own way, believed the vampires were oppressed by the supremacy of the Time Lords, and believed the only parasite were the Time Lords' hypocrisy. That prologue sequence plays excellent love and respect to the original novel, and a quick but effective way of explaining the lore and content that is covered within the book Goth Opera, and the extended media lore as well relating to the history of the Great Vampires and the Time Lords. Music to my soul, because the extended media, while it might be quite a crazy statement, perhaps my favourite period of the show, along with the classic era. The vampires themselves, the young ones, are written very similar to Vampire Science by Kate Orman and Jonathan Blum. Young, slightly cocky, with their newfound powers, and Ruath making her appearance. Ruath is one of the Time Lords who is obsessed with the Great Vampires, and one of the few characters who never had any ulterior motives, but was completely devoted to the vampires and the Great Messiah known as Yavin. Within the original continuity of the Virgin New Adventures, this followed the events of Blood Harvest. Yavin was almost killed and severely weakened. Ruaf, played by Natalie Gummead, plays the role of a crazed cultist really well, to the point even the vampires are slightly concerned about her being a little bit loony in the head. She's almost crying in desperation to the fact that she keeps saying the great Messiah must be here when digging him up, completely devoted to him, because without Yavin, the vampires will be lost. I believe it makes a slight nod to Blood Harvest, but the book does it differently, as in the book, it has flashback sequences of what happened to Yavin following the events from Blood Harvest to Goth Opera. The audio adaptation almost acts as like a self-contained story and not really making any nods and connections to Blood Harvest. Another difference is Nissa's first encounter with the vampires, tapping on the window. In the book, it was a baby covered in blood, talking like an adult. Here, it is Jake filling that role. I always found the scene within the book rather weird but creepy at the same time. So Nissa becoming a vampire happens very quickly in the audio, and as well with the book. Just the vampire is different. The vampires in the story try to do the same thing with Tegan, but doesn't work as she has dealt with more powerful entities such as the Mara, the god of beasts, and powerful in possession. So the vampire's mental control doesn't work on Tegan. Nissa tries to persuade and deflect the reality of being bitten by a vampire. Tegan and the Doctor don't yet expect Nissa to succumb to vampirism just yet. And when Ruaf brings up the name to Yavin, the Doctor, Yavin is frightened by that name, that he was responsible for the death of the Creator, but makes the reference that he's never met the Doctor, which makes the connections to Blood Harvest different, which it was the prequel to this story. So as I stated, the novel adaptation doesn't follow the direction of linking the events to Blood Harvest, and more being its own self-contained storyline and playing more to the sequel of State of Decay and the East-Space trilogy. That is one of the biggest differences this audio adaptation has, of the original continuity and the connections with how the Virgin books did it. The Doctor and Tegan are concerned about Nissa, which I find bittersweet, and even though Goth Opera plays a big role for Nissa, a lot of charm and wonderful character moments come from Tegan, which when reading the book I was pleasantly surprised how well the role is in the original material and the audio too. Tegan dealing with the Mara, a much more powerful being compared to the vampires, and how it has a role in Goth Opera was brilliant continuity. How Tegan helps and reassures the Doctor when he feels he might lose Nissa and lose everything because of the events of Earthshock. Losing Adric played a massive toll on his well-being. The death of his friends haunts the Fifth Doctor a lot, and Tegan acting as reassurance is powerful within this audio. Nissa and her morals and principles now conflicting with her ever-growing vampirism is one of the darkest aspects of the story. The vampires here are very sly in their dialogue and almost chill. At the same time, they are saying lines like, "Oh, I'm gonna bite you now." The scene within the book, when Tegan makes contact with the vampire named Jeremy, was in my opinion much better in the book. In the book, it was utterly terrifying. Just him watching Tegan sleep and just waiting for Tegan to wake up and then introduce himself. Jeremy was an utter creep in the book and I loved it. Here, it just more happens. So that part of the story, it was done way better in the book. Saying that, Part 1 is very fast paced, and like the book as well, it was captivating, but in terms of its aspects of horror, the book is in fact better than delivering that atmospheric horror, but credit to the music score and the sound design, it is some of the best and works tremendously in evoking the feeling of Goth Opera, what it's all about. Not only that, but it does evoke Season 17 E-Space with State of Decay, the pastiche of Terrance Dix's work. It definitely nails it in that department. The scene where Nissa has locked herself away in the TARDIS laboratory, That makes me have flashback scenes to the book, where the Doctor is demanding Nyssa opens the door. The audio doesn't cover it, but I still have the scenes in my head. But the book plays out where Nyssa is covered in blood. That was a powerful scene, and in fact, the audio does do it when Nyssa is confronted by Tegan. Seeing Nyssa slowly and mentally breaking down, and her heightened senses about sensing evil, making it even more depressing, and Nyssa is completely succumbed to the control of vampirism. The Doctor describes vampires as a victim to their own hunger, but they do what they must to survive. Nyssa brings up questions. Is there any hope for them? And the Doctor calls them predators. He also draws comparisons to humans as well, describing human beings have committed cannibalism when desperation happens. Eventually, it becomes too much for Nyssa, and Tegan witnesses her closest friend covered in blood like the original cover. The feeding have overpowered her thoughts and attacks Tegan. In my opinion, one of the most powerful moments in scenes in Doctor Who's canon and continuity. That is what Goth Opera does so well when I read the book. It is the horror of the situation. And does the audio do it? Yes, it delivers in that aspect too. There might be some scenes that play out differently, but I still feel that the audio delivers in achieving the horror of the situation. I might have had my doubts when some scenes played a little differently, but I was in fact proven wrong, and the audio delivers what the book did so well. So fair play to Big Finish and everyone who worked on this adaptation of the original works. And what the book achieved, the audio achieved as well. But it seems like what I didn't care about the book, I also didn't care much about the audio too. That is Victor Land's character and the Madeline plot. Victor Land arrived to Manchester with hearing the events of satanic activity in the area. I always found him not required or necessary, and I still feel the same way with Victor Land. I just don't really care much about his character. But going back to a character who I do think is a star of the show, Ruoff, throughout the story reveals her intentions. She doesn't hate the Time Lords, but believes they are weak due to their own rules and code. Ruoff has plans to save, quote unquote, both the Time Lords and the vampires. The scenes of Yarvin and Nyssa are some of the best moments of the story. Yarvin saying Nyssa doesn't have to become a vampire, and doesn't wish to rule under vampires who don't want to be a part of vampirism, which is nothing more but manipulation. And when Nyssa leaves, Ruoff entered. Yarvin says, tormenting the innocent can be a satisfying pleasure. That moment was in the book, and the audio still has that punch. The story about how the Time Lords plunged the vampires into eternal darkness was awesome. This connects to their plan of putting the world and the whole universe under eternal darkness and leaving Earth to become victim to the vampires' curse indefinitely. As I said too, the teamwork between Tegan and the Doctor to stick to the priority of saving Nyssa, despite everything that has happened, like with Victor Land being swarmed, everything is looking rather bleak to stop the threat. And again, that's why Goth Opera is such a freaking brilliant story. If we're talking about the book or the audio, because the audio manages to achieve what the book accomplishes. The horror of the situation surrounding Nyssa, what Yarvin wants to achieve, and the Doctor and Tegan have incredible scenes about fighting this menace and not being pushed into defeatism. The book achieves that, and the audio achieves it too. So this audio was a big win for me. I do prefer the book, and that's not surprising to me, because the fact some of the scenes in the book were truly horrifying, encapsulating gothic horror, and some of the most terrifying scenes I have ever read within a Doctor Who book. It doesn't do it that much within the audio. Despite that, I will say the audio adaptation of Goth Opera was a success at a 9 out of 10. Now, to quickly summarise the differences with the book compared to the audio, some of the deep and extensive lore is not covered in the audio, to make it a little bit more open to listeners, which I completely get, because when I was reading Goth Opera I said to myself in the review, but it does cover rather deep and extensive lore surrounding the Time Lords and the great vampires. It's a very extensive lore, even into Yarvin's family, called Agona, who was in fact an Eternal, which is very deep within the lore of the Wilderness Years, which Big Finish didn't touch on, and I kind of get that. Also, the connections to Blood Harvest is different, and Ruoff's origins to her obsession to learning about the vampires, which also features scenes with Romana, isn't included. So, if you want a more in-depth analysis on Goth Opera and the extended media lore that isn't touched too much in the audio, I recommend watching my review on the book, which is more of an in-depth into the storyline. But in my opinion, the adaptation of Goth Opera was a success. And that opens the door to Big Finish feeling optimistic, depending on sales mind you, doing more novel adaptations in the future of Virgin New Adventures and Virgin Missing Adventures in the 90s, and if Big Finish ever get the rights to do so, we can also include the past Doctor Adventures and the 8th Doctor Adventure BBC books too. I can say that this audio adaptation was a complete success. Well done to Big Finish and everyone involved, as you have delivered perhaps the best novel adaptation release. Big Finish in Vortex says this is going to be a special one-off. Yep, as I said strongly, I completely disregarded that and didn't believe it at all. Goth Opera has always served as a test. All they gotta do is just keep the ball rolling, and I think personally, if I was to continue the novel adaptations, there is one that sticks out more than any other. And it seems that Paul Cornell is very happy to continue adapting his work into audio. Human Nature to me seems like the perfect one, because it will bring new series audience and quite a wide audience to the release because of its history. So that was my opinion on the novel adaptation of Goth Opera. Fantastic release, highly recommend it, and I hope it sells well, because you know what that means. More novel adaptations to come. Thanks for watching.